Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to another edition of the Nickel Press TV Waiver Wire Start Sit edition. It's a nice Tuesday night, 2 days before Thanksgiving. We're in Week 12 this week. I'm your host, Doug Moore. Find me on Twitter at DMooreNFL. I'm part of the Nickel Press TV media team. Joined this week by, I think, an up-and-comer. He's really been making a lot of noise. He's been really helping a lot of people, especially on social media. And he certainly made, some good picks. And we have talked several times before. Mike Goins of Dynasty Trade Calculator is joining me this week. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing dandy, Doug. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. You know, we're 2 days away from Thanksgiving, and we all know the real reason for Thanksgiving. It's football. Football.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving was created for football, and that's why we have 3 games on Thursday. No more buys. We got 16 games this week, and that's the way it's going to be for the rest of the season. So no more buys, no more worry about that. We're talking full strength. Dealing with a lot of injuries this week, so we're certainly going to tackle a few of them. Wanted to talk about first, it always seems on a Tuesday, right before our show, at least my show, that we get some sort of news that's fantasy-worthy, and it happened again this week. A couple hours ago, Johnny Manziel was announced to be benched this week. He's going to be their third-string quarterback instead of their first-string. Josh McCown comes back in. He's the number one guy. He will start on Monday night against the Ravens. For me, I guess the number one thing for me is we've seen a big difference between what McCown does and Manziel does, not only putting up numbers in the passing game, but also who he throws to. So I think the number one thing, at least for me, because I'm a Gary Barnidge owner, Gary Barnidge must be smiling right now because Josh McCown loves him a lot more than Johnny Manziel does. And I would say the same with Travis Benjamin. McCown's just a better passer. It looks like he's put up more stats passing versus when Manziel has. He has the ability to throw it up, go for over 300 yards, get a touchdown or two. He's interception prone, but otherwise he puts up good stats, especially in a matchup against a very, very weak Baltimore Ravens defense. In the matter of hours, for me, Josh McCown has gone from nobody worth owning to now a guy who might even be worthy of starting this week in some leagues. Wanted to ask your opinion about Josh McCown. I'm a bigger fan than most in fantasy football about him, considering the stats he's able to put up. So, Mike, what do you think about Josh McCown starting again at least this week, and especially against the matchup with the Ravens, who are just atrocious in almost every aspect of defense?
That's a great question, and it's such a hot button topic right now. It's very rare this late in the season, with less than 48 hours until Thanksgiving Day, and some leagues rosters are going to lock, so people are going to be scurrying to make those waiver claims. But and not to mention trade deadlines are going to be passing if they haven't already passed for most leagues. But to have somebody like Josh McCown to be readily available to have this particular matchup, it's rare that you're going to get a streaming QB1 under these types of circumstances. And yes, I completely agree. He certainly provides, albeit not a sexy appeal to that offense, a very bland offense with him, but at the same time the engine keeps moving in the right direction, and it's not based on improv. It's based on fundamentals and basically traditional routes and pocket presence and what have you. So certainly your golden boy, baby Gronk, Gary Barnidge, he gets an uptick and becomes, I would say, a low-end tight end 1, if not a solid tight end 1 this week. If you base it off of, and here's my fear in these types of situations, people have already been processing and they've been praying about who they're going to start, and then something like this happens, and then they get first waiver choice, and they grab him, and they take out Stafford, and they put in McCown. Stick with your studs. Don't ride the emotion of the moment. It was week 4, I think it was, that he went off for 450-plus yards and 2 touches against Baltimore. People are going to be trying to harness that lightning in a bottle. I would say temper that. Don't be overzealous and drop somebody that is going to be a better rest of the season play, because if you look ahead to Cleveland's schedule, weeks 12 and 14. In 14, they play the 49ers. Those are the only two really viable starts that if he's going to be the guy behind center, then I'm going to plug him in confidently. Other than that, let somebody else burn their waiver dollars or burn their waiver spot when you can go and pick up one of the running backs, which, as we'll get to, I'm sure, shortly about all the injuries that we incurred there. But certainly Travis Benjamin, I think, becomes a wide receiver 2. Barnage becomes a tight end 1, and really that's about it. I mean, maybe Duke Johnson gets a few more passes out of the backfield, but I don't see it as being a know-all, end-all for the overall offense as itself.
Yeah, I think in terms of what we're looking for in terms of production out of the other players in Cleveland, Duke, Johnny Manziel doesn't really throw to a receiving running back. We saw that a little bit. That's going to help Duke Johnson others out, like you pointed out. Gary Barnes seems to be more favored by McCown than Manziel. Travis Benjamin as well. You brought up a really good point. I had actually just tweeted it out before you had brought it up. McCown played Baltimore in Week 5, went for 457 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is an incredible game. 35.48 points. And it's hard to argue with this. He's thrown 4 interceptions all season against 11 touchdowns, almost 2,000 yards, and about going off the math. We'll take out Week 1 because he only threw 8 passes. So in 6 weeks, he's thrown for over almost 1,900 yards, which is over 300 a game. I just really think he's going to put up stats, and that's what we're going to see. He hasn't even thrown that many interceptions. In only 3 games this season, it looks like he's only thrown interceptions. Week 3, he threw 1. Week 6, he threw 2, and that was against Denver. And then he threw 1 Week 8 against Arizona. So it's hard to see. For me, I'm a big fan of him. So I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback this week for me, just based off of what we saw. And Baltimore has not gotten any better. And relatively speaking, the Browns and all their skill players are all fully healthy. I just think the Browns are going to feast on this team because we just saw them lose their quarterback, their running back. They lost their number 1 wide receiver. They lost their that's just their offense. They just have nobody. This is arguably the worst team in the NFL. So I just really like this matchup this week. But we can't talk all about the Browns. I never thought I would actually have to stop myself from talking about the Browns. But we got to talk about what happened this weekend with all the running back injuries. We saw Justin Forsett, like I mentioned, go down with a broken forearm. He's out for the rest of the season. We saw Charkander West go down with a hamstring injury. He could be possibly looking at a multi-week injury. We saw Marshawn Lynch go down. He did not play, and he is going to see a surgeon, which is never good. He is not playing this week. Thomas Rawls goes off for over 200 yards rushing. So, and then also we're talking about Frank Gore, suffered a quad injury. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Carlos Hyde is still out. If there's any more, there's so many, it's hard to keep track of all of them. But a lot of people have been asking me, how do you rank these guys? How do you rank, and this is sort of going into our waiver wire piece a little bit, how do we rank these running backs on the waiver wire that people are going to be scrounging for, especially with fantasy playoffs coming right around the corner and everybody's trying to make sure they get in? So for me, I think the number 1 ad has to be Thomas Rawls. Granted, he went up against the 49ers, but he has put up stats in every game that really he's played in. And granted, it hasn't been much because Marshawn Lynch is not known to sit out of games. And we've seen that a little bit more than usual. Now, granted, he is getting older, and he's at that age for a running back where he starts to break down a little bit. But we saw him put up, 3 100-yard games this season, 104 against Chicago, 169 and a touchdown versus Cincinnati. And then we saw 209 yards against the 49ers on Sunday. Now, he does have a tough matchup. He's facing Pittsburgh, Minnesota, St. Louis, and Arizona, and those are all tough defenses. But I still think based upon volume alone, he got 30 touches in the run game on Sunday, 23 in Week 5, 17 in Week 4, and then 16 in Week 3. He's going to get the ball regardless. I think he's my number one waiver wire guy in terms of running backs, if not the entire, waiver wire itself. And I'll certainly be asking your opinion on how you rank them. But for me, the second guy would have to be Buck Allen. Buck Allen is now the starting running back at least for the rest of this. Well, not at least. He is the running back to start in Baltimore for the rest of the season. Forset's out for the season. Buck Allen, it did pretty well considering. Now, granted, it's not the kind of game that we saw Thomas Rawls, but Buck Allen went for over 100 yards combined. He actually went for 115 combined on 27 touches, and they beat the Rams, which I don't think many people expected. Now, granted, they had Joe Flacco in that game. Now they have Matt Schaub. We saw Matt Schaub. He was at his best when he was using Arian Foster in the pass game. And I think this is going to be sort of the same situation. Buck Allen ran 22 times. He also caught 5 catches on 6 targets. I could see Buck Allen going for at least 4 receptions a week for the rest of the season, if not more. So I would have to think his involvement in the pass game, considering how lack of pass catchers, I should say, are going around, I would think that he's going to be a threat for over 20 touches a week for the rest of the season, each game, I should say. And then I'll go quickly through the rest because I feel like I'm droning on. I want to get you involved here. My third would probably be Spencer Ware. Now, granted, we don't know how long Kendrick West is out. He could be back this weekend. Who knows? But Spencer Ware went in and rushed for almost 100 yards in less than a half of football. Granted, it was against San Diego, but it seems like whoever is running in Kansas City is putting up good numbers, whether it's Jamal Charles or Kendrick West or Spencer Ware. And then ranking out the rest, I think Ahmad Bradshaw comes in at a 4 for me because, he got 2 touchdowns with Matt Hasselbeck in the pass game. He was targeted in the red zone both times. He looks like he's one of the main threats for that Colts team that suddenly is starting to look a little bit better. Not shocking because it's Matt Hasselbeck at quarterback. That's probably how I rank them, at least off the top of my head. I want to ask you, Mike, though, how do you rank these running backs and why?
First and foremost, I think, especially with everybody that you just listed, and I completely agree with you on all of those. The only guy that I did not have under my top 5, or in this case top 4, was Ahmad Bradshaw. Certainly there's an argument to be made for that team being rejuvenated and then playing some inspired ball, considering they're still in the playoff race, which is blows my mind that that's even still feasible. But going back to the running backs, and these are the guys that I've actually got listed for my top waiver ads, Rawls being number 1. But here, before I get into the individualization of explaining why, I think there's an overall arching theme here. If you look at each one of these players, certainly they're being recommended because of injuries. And if the injuries wouldn't have occurred, they wouldn't be recommended at all unless they were deep roster stashes or players that offered perhaps dynasty appeal. But I think what we're seeing more and more in the NFL as a whole, especially as it pertains to skill position players, your running backs, receivers, and, to a lesser degree, tight ends, systems are making these players. There are very few standalone athletes. In my opinion, those numbers are dwindling. The workhorse back is becoming almost near non-existent. There for every Julio Jones and A.J. Green and Demaryius Thomas and OBJ types, there's 20 other middling number 2 receivers out there that are good fits for those systems. You look at Thomas Rawls, and certainly an unheralded guy coming in. They obviously thought enough of him to dump their front office favorite, Robert Turbin. Their spark score freak, Kristen Michael. They cut him loose. So this Rawls kid, they really enjoy having him there for whatever reason. He's not an overwhelming talent, but for what this system is predicated on, he's the perfect fit. He plays so well within the system. Now, certainly, if people are thinking I'm going to spend, again, going back to the emotional purchase, when you purchase things based on emotion, you're probably not thinking it through fully. In the case of Rawls, I think this guy does warrant a gutting of a purging of your waiver wire dollars, because I think rest of the season he will have a very integral role in that offense and even beyond. So from a system fit, I'm not going to expect him to put up 200 yards again. I mean, I don't care who he's playing. I just can't.
No, I don't think you can expect him, especially when you saw him go up against, a 49ers team where,
right.
They haven't been that good. No, I don't think you can go out and expect any running back to go and run for 200 yards. I think that's been done 3 times now this season.
Right.
And we actually saw 2 in 1 week. We saw Doug Martin run for 235. And then, if I'm not mistaken, we also saw Adrian Pearson, I think, either last week or the week before, run for 200 as well. It doesn't happen that often. But I think it's only a matter of time. I think one of the reasons why I have him so high on my list is because not only has he done well in this system, like you pointed out, it does seem like Marshawn Lynch will be out for the rest of the season. If Rawls does play, if Rawls is the starter by default, which I think he should be anyway, if Lynch is out, I should say, over, say, a Fred Jackson or a Bryce Brown, who they just brought back, I think he's a weekly top 15 threat, regardless of who they're playing. We saw him.
I totally agree.
And that could be for the rest of the season. I think he has the most upside over Buck Allen, who Buck Allen is running behind a porous offensive line in a absolutely ravaged offense where they've lost so many key players. You think about it this way: since last season, we saw them with Joe Flacco, Justin Forsett, Keenan Allen, but Steve Smith as well, and then also Dennis Pitta. Now you're looking at a team where it's got Matt Schaub, Buck Allen, I can't even think of his name off the top of my head, Kamar Aiken, and Crockett Gilmore.
It's a cornucopia of unknowns.
Plus, you know what they're going to do. You know what Matt Schaub is going to bring to the table, which isn't much. And that's the problem for Buck Allen, because they're going to be able to stack the box, and that offensive line is continuing to deal with small injuries that they had last season, where they had such a top offensive line. But they also just know that their passing game is so limited. Behind Kamar Aiken, there's nobody. It's hard when your number one guy is a tight end that is more known for his name than actually his play. And Crockett Gilmore, which I think is a pickup. I think he's worthy of a pickup. I do believe in Crockett. He's actually one of my more recommended pickups this week in terms of tight ends. I do think he'll be used more, because we saw with Matt Schaub in Houston when Gary Kubiak was around, they used tight ends a lot. And
absolutely,
a smart offensive coordinator like Mark Trestman is going to use a quarterback to his strengths. Now, granted, Matt Schaub doesn't have strengths, but let's pretend he does have one. That would probably be throwing to his running back and his tight end a lot. Who's that? That's Buck Allen and Crockett Gilmore. So that for me, I think, is probably what we're going to see. I don't expect Buck Allen to do a lot in the run game every week. We saw him run for just barely over 3 yards a carry, 22 rushes, 67 yards. Is he going to offer a lot in the run game? Probably not. But his versatility in the pass game is probably what's going to help him put him over the edge and maybe even make him a weekly flex play. But I think he's still worthy of it.
You make a good point, because that's actually what I was going to hone in on. Was he is another one of those guys that's a great system fit. He came into the NFL a little bit older. He was 23 years old in this year as a rookie. I loved his preseason interviews. This kid has his head on straight. He's a team guy. He's a stand-up guy. He's an integrity guy. He did not come in with this penchant for, I want to be the man, I want to have the ball, I'm going to be this, and I need to have that. He came in and said, I want to learn. I'm here to learn and to make myself a better player and to make this team better. And we haven't heard diddly out of him. He is not a guy that I think is the heir apparent in Baltimore. I think he's another guy that when I saw that he went to Baltimore and went with Trestman there, he's the perfect fit for a Trestman offense because this kid is exceptional at pass protection, at least for a rookie, has soft hands, and is very agile out of the backfield. He is, like you said, he is not going to be a between the tackles type of guy. He only had barely 3 yards of carry this last week. He made his meat on the 6 targets. He snagged in 5 of them for 48 yards. I mean, that's where you're going to get your gravy with Buck Allen. It's just so when you have, like, we've got this plethora of injuries, who's the next man up, and we're all scrambling to find out who we can go after and snag and get and put on the starting lineup. Well, not necessarily. You know, we've got to be mindful and temper ourselves a little bit and realize it's not going to be a bad thing to get them, but let's not just start them because they're the starter for that team now. Let's make sure we take a real close look at it before we just jump the shark, so to speak.
Definitely. So I don't mean to cut you off a little bit, but we actually have a caller coming in. I think I know who it is. I think it's our friend Andy. I'm letting him in right now. I hope it's Andy. I think he was supposed to call in. He told me it was. Andy, is that you?
It is. If you can hear me, it is.
It is Andy. It is Andy. Andy, my partner over at Nickel Press. He's been doing his weekly hanging Einstein pieces with some of the top names in fantasy football, but not even talking about fantasy football, talking about everything else but. That's what makes it so great. But Andy, how are you?
I'm good. How you guys doing?
Awesome.
We're doing good. We're in the middle of talking in depth about our waiver wires, especially those running backs with all the injuries that we saw. So I guess while you're here, I want to ask your opinion. I want to move a little bit away from the running backs a little bit for a second, because I think that some of the tight ends out there deserve some recognition. And a guy that I'm fond of this week, at least, is Brent Selleck. Brent Selleck is coming off of a great game where, he took over for Zach Ertz, who took a huge hit, has a concussion, and now they're playing on Thursday, where it's hard to predict that Zach Ertz could be ready for that. But Selleck over the past 2 games has 213 yards receiving and over 10 receptions as well. So I want to ask you, do you think if Zach Ertz is out, do you think Brent Selleck is a guy that could be a top, I'll say top 10. I'll say top 10, yeah. A top 10 tight end this week.
Who are you asking?
Are you asking
Hello?
Andy or me?
I'm sorry, I'm asking Andy. Forgive me. Oh, no, that's fine. And listen, I called in because I'm en route and I'm traveling, and I figured I'd call in to be the de facto gift from Mike, the gift master, since he tried to give some animation as an aside. But I'm having a lot more fun listening to you guys than having to worry about answering questions. And I know you want to get into the tight end stuff. The only tight end I really endorse is the only guy I really endorse, period, in Baltimore, and that'd be Crockett Gilmore. There's no way he's a waiver head, so I'm really going to give you nothing for this portion of your show right now. And I just wanted to circle back real quick though. And Mike, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, man.
To the running backs, real quick. The only appeal Buck Allen has is that he's the starter. That's it. And
exactly.
Thomas Rawls, if Marshawn Lynch doesn't play again this season, then obviously Rawls is your guy. Mike, you hit on some very good points. He's kind of like the perfect fit. But it's just the fact, even if it is kind of like some gamesmanship, just the fact that it's even being mentioned at all that Marshawn Lynch might be done, it's got to kind of worry you. But yeah, listen, go on with your conversation. This is our Mike show. I just want to say hello to Michael, and that's it. Keep doing your thing, guys.
Hey, thank you, brother.
Fair enough. We wanted to pick your brain, but we'll definitely keep it. We'll keep you in the background for that those soft golf claps every now and then.
Exactly. There you go.
So I guess I'll ask you that question that I had for Andy originally, that long drawn out question. besides Crockett Gilmore, who I think all three of us are in consensus about, at least from what it seems like, that he should be someone who's to be picked up off a waiver wire, just considering, for me, who Matt Schaub is, what he's done in his career. Mark Trestman has used tight ends a lot, especially what we saw with Martellus Bennett the last 2 seasons. I think he led tight ends in receptions last season. And I just think he's becoming more and more of a better pass catcher we've seen. But I want to ask your opinion. Maybe I'm the only one, but Brent Selleck this week seems like a good play if Zach Ertz is out. What do you think if Zach Ertz is out?
To tell you the truth, I'm going to agree with you. And it saddens me to say this because Zach Ertz is the talent at tight end in Philadelphia. Period. End of story. Conversation over. But for whatever reason, he is not being utilized. And I don't obviously know the inner workings for what Chip Kelly's doing. I think the guy's half off his rocker half the time. But certainly Selleck has even proven to be able to be productive when Ertz has been the starter. So I don't think it's necessarily does Selleck ascend to a low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 situation. I just simply don't trust that Philadelphia offense. And, of course, if it's going to happen, the likelihood that it happens is probably going to be more with Sanchez than it is going to be with Sammy Bradford. So certainly as a streamer, he's a guy that I would feel I'd be fine streaming him. We're past the bye weeks. Most tight ends, except for, maybe a couple that really aren't that productive right now anyway, are going to be starting. So if you're in a deep league, 16, 32-team league, and you need a waiver ad or a plug-and-play, certainly Selleck, I think, could certainly put up at least solid tight end 2 numbers, all things considered. But I simply am just not trusting anybody not named this week at least, not named Darren Sproles. With Ryan Matthews out, DeMarco Murray's been doing his thing, I guess. I haven't been that impressed with him this year, but Sproles to me I think is the sneaky flex start out of Philly. But speaking strictly on tight ends, certainly I think Selleck could offer some appeal as a tight end streamer this week. And, of course, if he gets the nod for the rest of the season as the tight end 1, then, yeah, he's in the weekly starter conversation. It's such a volatile, and the point differentials at that position are so crazy. So, yeah, I'm gonna agree with you.
Yeah, it's arguably I don't think it's even arguably. I think it's a consensus vote that the tight end position is literally the most unpredictable position in fantasy football. Especially when we have a guy like Gary Barnes, my boy, is now a top, I would think, in terms of points so far this season, a top 3 tight end.
It's insane.
And he wasn't even the guy that people had targeted in Cleveland. We thought Rob Hausler, if anybody, was going to be the guy. And it turns out Gary Barnes, my boy, is. I guess the last thing I want to talk about in terms of tight ends, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but we saw Vernon Davis. He complained last week of, not complained, but he sort of brought it up that he wasn't really used a lot in the game. He was confused as to why. Brock Osweiler, in a quarterback, he caught 6 catches, 68 yards, which as a tight end is nothing to sneeze at. That's arguably not even arguably, it's undoubtedly his best performance in a Broncos uniform, and it happened to be with Brock Osweiler at it. Do you think now granted, Emmanuel Sanders was out, so that did probably play a part into it. Do you think finally Vernon Davis is turning the corner to being that low-end tight end 1 that people had hoped he would be when he moved to Denver in the first place?
I think it's I'm a pessimist. I'm more of the guy that I want to see production and proof before I put all my cards on the table. Do I think that he is in line for that role rest of the season? Yes. It was a little worrisome that I can't remember if it was his first or his second. I guess it was his first game, and then, of course, Owen Daniels blows up and, with Manning, and everyone's thinking, why did Vernon Davis only get 1 target that game or whatever the case was? And obviously there's an acclimation process that has to occur. I get it. Peyton likes to play favorites. He's always been that way. Brock comes in, and contrary to popular opinion, Brock Osweiler doesn't have a cannon arm. He doesn't have a noodle arm, but he doesn't have a ridiculous arm that's going to throw the ball 80 yards, or 70 yards on target, or whatever the case may be. But he certainly is, I believe, going to run that offense with an efficiency that Manning couldn't. Now, he's not going to sit there and burn you. He's not going to keep the linebackers. He's not going to be able to keep them honest with his mobility out of the pocket because he's not he's not that agile of a guy. I mean, he's certainly not Steve Young or Marcus Mariota, but he does have some shiftiness to him, and he is a big frame dude. So when you have a Demaryius Thomas, when you have a Vernon Davis, even when you get Manny Sanders back, I think that's only going to make it more offer more potential for Vernon to actually exploit the matchups. Because even though he's not in his prime, he's still an athletic specimen. He was a spark score freak before they even had spark score scoring. And he's still a special athlete. He might have lost a half a step, but in that offense, in that system, I think he can still put up, tight end one numbers rest of the season. I can buy into that. I can subscribe to that to a degree. If Manning comes back in, my bet's off the table because Manning plays favorites, and he didn't use them before he went out. Manning's going to come back in frustrated, irritated, and ticked off. Who knows what he's going to do? But the fact is he just doesn't have the physical attributes, I don't think, to get the job done right now. And I think it's probably smart that they're sitting him so that they can let him rest up. They've got a good record. Brock can come in and kind of man the ship for a game or two, get Manning ready to go, and then hopefully by that time Vernon will be well situated and ready to take the reins as the move tight end for Denver and truly be that weekly tight end one start at such a, as you said earlier, volatile position.
Yeah, and hopefully, we saw that Peyton Manning was just ruled out for at least the next 2 weeks. So we're talking, Sunday and then the game after, where we'll see at least those 2 games with Brock at the quarterback. So maybe we'll be able to see if Vernon Davis is truly part of the game plan, at least with Brock Osweiler in there. Moving into sort of the last guy I wanted to talk about for waiver wires. This is, I would think, the consensus number one wide receiver to pick up on waiver wires this week. It's sort of turning the clock, I guess, the other way, sort of flipping the hourglass over. We got Father Time and Vernon Davis to a young pup and a rookie, Devin Funchess. He scored 2 touchdowns over the past 3 games. He saw 8 targets on Sunday. And that led actually all wide receivers. And, Corey or Philly Brown, whatever you want to call him, was out. But Philly is, I believe, Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, is playing on a short week. But if they're not even, Corey Brown doesn't look like he'll play. He was ruled out, on Sunday. He has a shoulder injury. It's hard to rush a player back when they can't play on Sunday, but, they hope he can play on Thursday. But I would have to think this is the time, if not any other time, where he's still free in about 2/3 of Yahoo leagues when I was able to pull up. This is the time to go and grab him, as his role only looks to be increasing, especially with Cam Newton playing such a high level right now. Just want to get your take. I think he has the ability to be a top 30 wide receiver the rest of the season. Agree or not agree?
I completely agree. In fact, I agree with you. He's starting to come alive. He's a guy that I enjoyed as a prospect coming out of college. I drafted him in a couple of my leagues this year. I'll go ahead and, full disclosure, I have since traded him, but that was weeks ago and for other, to satisfy other needs. But he certainly is coming alive. He's a guy that I wish I could have back on my team. In the event some of the people in my leagues are listening right now, I'm sure it's going to make that much more difficult for me to acquire him for having said that. But his snap count, if I'm not mistaken, this past week was around 76, 78%. Prior to that, it was 38%. So his snap count has been steadily rising. This week, he's got a great matchup against a beatable Washington secondary. Last week.
That was last week.
This week, rather, he's got Dallas. Now, it's not to say that Dallas is, the know-all, end-all from a defensive secondary standpoint, but they are going to be a tougher matchup. I love, like you had stated earlier, Cam is starting to finally loosen up offensively. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that he hasn't done it sooner. But when you look at the facts, this could be a beautiful unveiling for Funchess, because having given him plenty of time to make that transition from tight end, and as big and as fantastic as he can be, it's not like he's this dynamic physical specimen. I mean, he had his biggest trouble was getting off the blocks. And then it's not so much separating from coverage, because he doesn't need to. All he's got to do is jump, and nobody's gonna be able to jump as high as he can. So I think this is smart from Carolina's offensive mindset to start expanding and diversifying their attack as we get into the deeper part and the colder part of the season, especially gearing up for the playoffs, because they're going to have to diversify that attack when they're in the playoffs. But here's some cool things to note and some key things to note, which I think are going to prove your point that he can possess top 30 ability rest of season, and that's he's got 2 games left against Atlanta and 1 game against the Giants on their schedule. Now, of course, the Atlanta game's in the Dome, the other one's in Carolina. The one against the Giants, I can't remember if that's in New York or in Carolina, but it doesn't really matter. The Giants' defensive pass and secondary is horrible. So he certainly has got some games here where he can be a force if he continues on the steady progression that he's been on and they start focusing on him. Now, you mentioned Corey Brown, and you didn't mention Ted Ginn, but it doesn't matter if Corey Brown's playing. It doesn't matter if Ted Ginn's the X, Brown's the Z. They can't do what Funchess can do. And I don't mean that just from a red zone standpoint. What Funchess offers is something that, they haven't had since Kelvin Benjamin last year, that size differential. You can't train size, and I think that his slow roll unveiling has allowed him to learn his body at the NFL level, and I think that's what we're seeing translate. And so, yes, with his matchups coupled with Cam's, it's seemingly his desire to spread it around and really focus on this young kid, he could be better than top 30 rest of the season.
Great. I'm glad to hear we're in consensus about something. Not sure that we haven't been, but it's good to hear that another thing we are consensus about. So sort of moving into our last part, our last segment of the show, where, is aptly named in the show, the start-sit portion of our show, where we're going to go into, a position player in each, your quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end that we'd recommend starting and we recommend sitting and why. So I usually start off just to sort of show the flow a little bit because everybody's different, and this is just, usually how I try to do it at least. But I'll start with the starts, and I'll start with the quarterback position. And I would think that this guy is the consensus for, out of the blue, stream him this week, if not any other week. That's Brian Hoyer. Did not play last week. He did not have a concussion. He did not play. He had a concussion. Sounds like he will be ready, though, for this weekend. Facing New Orleans. New Orleans has given up the most points over the past 5 weeks per game to quarterbacks. New Orleans, just for whatever it's worth, New Orleans has given up 17 passing touchdowns over the past 4 games, which is averaging out to 4.25 touchdowns. And also, they're also giving up 344.5 yards on average per game as well. So 344 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's a hell of a game. Not to say that Brian Hoyer will hit the average, but he's been surprisingly consistent when he has played for fantasy owners. Now, granted, he's not owned by many, but he is putting up decent stats. And in a season where we saw Peyton Manning do poorly. Aaron Rodgers struggled a little bit. Matt Ryan's not putting up numbers. Then we also saw Andy Dalton, of all people, who I'll be talking about later, putting up decent numbers this season. So for me, I like Brian Hoyer this week. I think DeAndre Hopkins can go off for 200 yards potentially against this secondary where it's absolutely atrocious. But I really love Brian Hoyer this week and his matchup. So what about you, Mike? Who is that quarterback that you tell people to start this week? Give it why?
I love the Hoyer's recommendation. I'm gonna backtrack a little bit here, and I'm gonna also go back and say for those people listening and those people in dire straits at quarterback for whatever reasons, McNown is certainly a guy that I think you should feel comfortable with being able to plug in this week. Like we both said, weeks 12 and 14 are going to be optimum starts. So if you've got him and you're not fully confident with your other primary starting quarterback, don't hesitate putting him in for the reasons we mentioned earlier. Mine's going to be a bit more obvious. I didn't go with a deep random selection at starting quarterback, but certainly a guy that has defied all odds this year, and for whatever reasons, Bruce Arians has allowed the offense to actually breathe on its own 2 feet, which has been refreshing. But Carson Palmer has been the epitome of efficient this year. In the games that I thought he was going to, fall on his face, for instance, a couple weeks ago against Seattle, or even against the St. Louis Rams, he's certainly been able to rise to the occasion. He's playing a god-awful San Francisco secondary this week. They, for the average of the season, they're averaging just under 280 yards against through the air. And we haven't gotten to this guy yet, and I don't know if we will, but he's got a new toy in J.J. Nelson. I think J.J. Nelson is not going to be the guy that keeps the train moving in the right direction, but you can never have too many weapons, and this is just another weapon, late season addition weapon, that the number one of the top 4 passing offenses in the league, other teams probably didn't think they needed that at this stage of the season. So I'm looking for Carson Palmer to have an exceptional week, and over the last 3 weeks, he's already put up 11 touchdowns against only 4 interceptions. That ain't too bad. And I look for that to be another home game for Arizona where he can steamroll and do his business. And, of course, Chris Johnson will be able to clean up and eat with the garbage points.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I like Carson Palmer, especially especially in this matchup, like you pointed out. Going into the starting running back for me this week, the guy I'm telling people to start this week, Chris Ivory. Chris Ivory's coming off a pretty, at least considered what we thought he was going to do. Had a pretty poor week, 36 yards on the ground, 9 yards in the air. Facing Miami, though. Miami has actually given up the most points. Now, this is in half PPR leagues. The most points over the past 5 weeks per game. He already faced Miami once this season. It's a divisional game. Ran for 166 yards and a touchdown in week 4. Now, over the past 5 games, Miami's given up on average 126 yards on the ground and a touchdown. They've given up 5 touchdowns in 5 games. I really like this matchup for Ivory. I think he's already torched them once this season, and I think he has the ability to do it again. Even though this time there's new coaching scheme, new coaching and all that, but I still like it. And Miami's just doing bad against the run. So I just really like this matchup this week for Chris Ivory. What about you? What about for your running back that you would recommend starting this week?
I love the Ivory selection. I think he's one of the more underappreciated RB1s out there right now. So there's nothing I can say that disagrees with what your comments were. My recommended start this week is T.Y. Yeldon. He's going to be home against San Diego. Although San Diego's run D has tightened ever so slightly over the past 3 weeks on the average, but this last week they were gashed by Spencer Ware for 98 yards and 2 touches. And this is a team allowing on average, 126 yards per game on the ground, and they were gashed by the third-string running back in Kansas City. I've been impressed with Yeldon's performance up to this point in the season. You know, the guy is not a complainer. He's not 100% healthy, but he gets out there and he steadily is able to put up running back 2 numbers, if not low-end number 2 numbers. I think this is a prime matchup for him to get at least 1 touchdown, which would only make his second touchdown of the season, if I'm not mistaken. But I think this is a prime matchup for him. They've kept him out of harm's way by limiting him this last week with only 14 carries, albeit it was a tough matchup. But even at a less than 100%, being the workhorse back, Yeldon should eat this week, and I think he's going to be a strong play for anybody across the board. I know there's a lot of roster-restricted leagues out there, which just would drive me insane. So if Yeldon is on your wire, he's a guy that I would certainly recommend picking up and plugging in and have him take advantage of this matchup against San Diego.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, definitely, especially in that matchup where we saw a third-string running back go for that many yards in less than a half. So moving into the wide receivers, it's a little bit out of left field for me. I'm not a big fan of this guy this season, but I think his matchup and how he's done recently is a big reason why I'm going to have people start on this week, and that's Golden Tate. 11 targets, 8 receptions, and 73 yards against Oakland. Facing Philadelphia, they've given up the 5th most points in half PPR leagues over the past 5 weeks per game. He's had 3 straight games with 50 yards or more reception yards. Philadelphia has given up 7 touchdowns to wide receivers over the past 4 games. It's nearly 2 a game. So I wouldn't mind seeing Calvin Johnson and Golden Tate both go for a touchdown. But I think that Golden Tate is on the right side. He's trending upward. It looks like my Detroit's offense is getting a little bit better. Not to say this is because of a new change or anything like that. It just seems to be working better a little bit. And I think Golden Tate is starting to be featured more in the game, especially with Eric Ebron not doing that well. And just their run game, they're trying their best, but they just seem to be focusing more on the pass. I like Golden Tate, considering his production recently, his consistent production, and the matchup. What about you for your wide receiver? Who would you recommend this week, Mike?
Love that Golden Tate pick. Detroit's got some great scheduling through the latter part of the season, especially for fantasy football playoff purposes. Mine is going to be Deshaun Jackson. Finally back healthy. I think he's fully healthy now. Didn't have the greatest of games last week, although he was tied with his on his team for 8 targets. Had that one 56-yard touchdown that he caught, and then he was pretty much quiet after that. But this week they take on their rivals, the New York Giants, who, as we know, has one of the league's worst pass defenses. I think he gets back in the box scores with a better PPR performance and equally yardage and touchdown-wise. I'm looking for Kirk Cousins to really be airing it out all day long, and D-Jax is one guy I think should benefit. But the facts are Jordan Reed is a little dinged up, he's always dinged up, but he's dinged up again. Garcon just isn't cutting the mustard. Crowder is a situational deep threat. I think D-Jax is going to eat this week. I think he's going to get a plentiful amount of opportunities. And, I mean, this could be one of his better games of the season.
Definitely, especially with how long he's been out. We could definitely see that. And it's funny you brought up somebody that I'm going to be talking about next. We got a little more than 10 minutes left, and this always happens. We just talk so much, us fantasy football guys, and I want to make sure we get through everything. So we're going to go a little bit faster. Sure. I'm going to try to talk a little bit faster. Make sure we get through everything for everybody, and make sure we don't run out of time. So, funny you mentioned Jordan Reed. He's my must-start tight end this week. Went for 6 catches, 46 yards, and 8 targets against Carolina. Facing New York, the Giants, I should say, giving up the second most points in half PPR leagues per game in the last 5 weeks. New York has given up 2 touchdowns. They actually give up 2 touchdowns to the Patriots in Week 10 to tight ends Scott Chandler and Rob Gronkowski. He is facing a minor knee injury, but he's fully expected to play this week. He tied for the most targets in Washington the past 4 weeks with 19. And, the Giants are giving up on average more than 90 yards a game to tight ends. I love his matchup this week. I think he'll be fully healthy to play, and he's still remained a top cog or a main cog in this offense. What about you for your starting tight end this week, the guy you recommend people starting?
First and foremost, I hope that happens because I'm starting Reed in one of my leagues, so let's just hope that happens. My guy's going to be Heath Miller. Coming off a bye with Big Ben back under center, I think seam and underneath routes are going to be quick hits that Miller can exploit, albeit against a tough Seattle defense that will look to keep this game, in my opinion. Seattle is going to try to make this game a grind. Although Miller's been up and down in his 11th NFL season to this point, as of late, his targets have been heating up, and I think you're going to see a lot of one-on-one coverage on the deep routes, on the outside, taking away Martavius Bryant. I think you're going to see Antonio Brown becoming an integral part underneath with the quick hits along with Miller, which is why I'm recommending him. I think he can be a chain mover and a guy that's going to keep Ben safe because he's not going to want to stay in that pocket for any longer than he has to against Seattle's tough defense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Whenever Ben plays, it seems like Heath Miller is used more than any other quarterback. Moving into our sits this week, I'm going to start with the quarterback. Talked about him earlier. I'm going to tell people to sit Andy Dalton this week. Coming off actually a really good game. He threw for 315 yards and 2 touchdowns against Arizona. Facing St. Louis, they've given up the 7th fewest points over the past 5 weeks per game to quarterbacks. Believe it or not, St. Louis has actually given up fewer than 250 yards on average the past 5 weeks, and they've only given up 4 passing touchdowns over the past 5 weeks as well. It's just a really tough matchup. I think that we're going to see AJ Green shut down again because they get a really good secondary. They're going to bring the heat through the pass rush, and I think this could be more of a run-centric game, especially when we saw Jeremy Hill for 2 touchdowns last week. Don't like this matchup this week for Andy Dalton. Just something about it. I don't like that St. Louis has been really tough against the quarterback, and I think he's due for another bad game. So that's for me. What about you? Who is that quarterback that you'd actually tell people to sit this week?
And I'll make mine short and sweet. Right to the point, it's Matt Ryan I'm sitting. If Minnesota can limit Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan ain't no Aaron Rodgers. Atlanta, although they're going to be playing at home, the Minnesota pass defense has been a staunchy bunch this season, only allowing about 225 yards per game. And after coming off that performance against Rodgers, who albeit did throw for just a hair over 202 touches, with Matt Ryan, if Devontae Freeman's going to be even so slightly dinged up and Tevin Coleman's coming in, he doesn't have the hands. Mr. Stiff Hips isn't going to be that juke back out of the backfield catching those passes. I think it's going to limit their offensive awareness, and I think it's going to be it'll make Ryan vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think Matt Ryan has done really well in fantasy football recently, so I don't expect him to do well this week, especially in a tough matchup like you pointed out. So for my sit running back this week, the big one, the running back I'm telling people to sit this week, give me Latavius Murray, actually. Had a rather poor performance, and that was actually against Detroit, who has actually been really, I guess, generous to running backs in fantasy football. 13 rushes, 28 yards, so a little over 2 yards a carry. Did get a touchdown, though. Facing Tennessee, they've given up actually the 2nd fewest points in half PPR leagues per game over the past 5 weeks to running backs. He couldn't perform well. I actually wrote this, could not perform well against Detroit. And Tennessee has actually only given up 2 rushing touchdowns in the past 6 games to running backs. Don't like this performance. I think that Tennessee's defense is underrated. I think that they're performing well. And I don't like Latavius Murray's matchup. I think they're going to exploit Tennessee's secondary, especially if McCourty's out again. So I don't like this matchup for Murray this week. What about you for your sit running back this week?
Well, that hurts my heart because I have Latavius Murray and I have to start him. So I'm going to pray that you're wrong, but you make total sense, and I might have to try to swing a deal now. I'm sitting D'Angelo Williams, and really quick, the reason why Seattle is in desperate need of a win, they're playing at home with the 12th man. I think, like I mentioned earlier, they're going to make this game a grind. They're going to put as much pressure on Ben as they can. I think they're going to negate the deep ball. Williams isn't going anywhere against this defense that is riding a high, albeit it was the 49ers, but they held them to 59 yards rushing last week. So this week going against the Pittsburgh Steelers, this week with D'Angelo going against the Seahawks, I think that if he's going to eat, it's going to be through short dump-off passes. He's not going to move anywhere on the ground. It's going to be like I said, I think this is going to be a grind game. I think the under is going to probably cover. I'm looking at Seattle really trying to be conservative with their offensive approach and make sure they escape this win and get over 500 for the first time in a while.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that, just considering how they've been doing recently. So my sit wide receiver this week is actually going to be Stephon Diggs. Actually coming off a rather good game, 9 targets, 6 catches, 66 yards against Green Bay. He is facing Atlanta, though. Atlanta has given up the fewest points to wide receivers, half PPR leagues, over the past 5 weeks per game. On average, they have given up 7.5 catches, 85 yards, and 1/4 of a touchdown. That's to all wide receivers. So over the past 4 games, they've only given up 30 catches, 340 yards, and a touchdown to all wide receivers they face. They've also given up the fewest yards and catches out of any team over the past 4 games. Past 5 weeks, I should say, to wide receivers. And Diggs hasn't scored in 3 games. Don't like this matchup. It's an extremely tough matchup. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I think Atlanta's defense, especially the secondary, has turned on really as well this season. So I'm going to sit Stephon Diggs this week. We got about 3 minutes left. Let's try and get through these last 3 players. So what about you for your sit wide receiver?
My sit wide receiver, this one's easy. Against the hottest defense in the NFL right now, Sammy Watkins is pulling up some pine. If he can't get off against their arch nemesis, the Patriots, he's not getting anywhere at Arrowhead. So 6 targets, 3 for 39 last week, isn't going to get it done in any format anyway. You don't even want to have those numbers for your flex position. In Kansas City, against that defense right now, you're sitting Sammy Watkins, period, paragraph, game over, move on to the next player.
Yeah, no, I mistakenly put him as my start last week, considering the matchup, and he burned me. So, lastly, sit tight end this week, Travis Kelce. Facing Buffalo, they've given up the fewest points to tight ends in any format, actually, over the past 5 weeks. They have given up only 8 catches, 72 yards, and no touchdowns in the past 4 weeks. 5 weeks, 4 games, I should say. That is incredible. And he has not surpassed 50 yards in the past 3 games, Travis Kelce. Hate this matchup this week. I would sit him this week. What about you for your tight end?
Tight end I'm sitting this week. I'm going to keep it in Kansas City and keep it with Buffalo. It pains me to say this for a University of Tulsa boy, but Charles Clay got to pull up a chair and sit down. Once again, it goes back to the defense. It goes back to the usage, the system. It's unfortunate. It's a travesty that players like Clay and although he's not playing right now, Harvin and Sammy and Robert Woods and these guys, even LaShawn McCoy by extension, to be able to be in an offense that is restricting and minimizing the talent that they bring to the table. It's too conservative. It's just not going to be enough meat on the bone. Charles Clay, as much as I love the kid to death, is riding the pine this week against that ridiculously hot Kansas City defense.
Definitely. So that'll do it for us here this week. I want to thank Mike for coming on. Great knowledge. Dynasty Trade Calculator. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at FFRegulator, and also, if I'm not mistaken, DTC_Michael G. Follow me on Twitter, DMoreNFL. Follow the Nickel Press TV. Follow Andy, who's been sitting along in the background patiently this whole time, at People's Pens. Make sure to follow and check out the new Hanging Iron Stand that will be coming out sometime this week. Great stuff. Good luck in Week 12. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. And go Pats, of course. Go Pats. Have a great week, guys.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thanks a lot.